So happy to be back with The Real Truth About Health for the 11th year now. And today we're going to talk about an incredibly important subject, freedom, because we are in a situation today for the first time in maybe a century where this is being challenged. It's being challenged on several different levels. Now, to get a really great understanding of what we're discussing, we have to go back through human history. Our nomadic beginning connection to the earth initiated our journey. The primal man lived quite simply with abundance and liberated movement, since nature provided all necessary substances. And when you had these, you had maximum health and strength. So most of us don't recognize and realize the highest level of time that we've been, the longest level of time we've been on this planet Earth, we were nomads. Now think about this. We didn't have the stresses of jobs. We didn't have the stresses of housing, the stresses of economics, but we did have environmental connectivity. So we were very close to the Earth and understood the Earth and felt the Earth provided every single thing that it possibly was needing for us to live well and healthy. We weren't happy then. We just couldn't stay happy. So we decided to take ownership. And the ownership gave way to the agrarian generation. This is where we chose to settle on land, creating boundaries and borders, living off rich organic soil. Now, the difference was that we now had a more limiting way of eating and thinking, because we put fences up and we actually said, this is what we own. This is what we create. Now, this domino effect went far. This actually evolved into countries, and it evolved into locations, be it provinces or states within countries. And then to protect the countries, we ended up with our own economies and eventually our own armies to protect what we owned. So now restriction began. And what we know is just recently, for the first time in human history, we understand metabolism. Believe it or not, everything that we had ever been taught in school before that was hypotheses. Now we get metabolism and recognize that the nomads had about 6.5 children. Agrarians, because we were eating high diets with a lot more richness within the diets, we went to about 9.5 children. But at the same moment, we became restricted. What we were eating and how we were eating was not a wide cross-section that we achieved from going from the north to the south and the south to the north. We weren't happy enough there. So now a handful of people called the landlords. So those of you that rent places and you have landlords, that is an English terminology. The aristocracy were born into wealth. The only other people that had anything that resembled wealth were people who owned land. And they were the original taxation people. So in Europe, if you lived on their land, they taxed you. And they weren't happy enough with that. They said, well, you have to now start creating products so we can sell to peasants. And they didn't think this out very well because they had to hire peasants to make products to sell to the peasants. And this is in the mid-1800s, 19th century, in England, when the Industrial Revolution began. Now, this was a significant social shift. Remember this. We had to go out and convince these young men who had, throughout the entire history of the human race, lived on with the land, worked with nature, nature worked with us. We were symbiotic with it. They had to go to them and say, would you move to Manchester? Would you move to London and work in our factory? And they probably said something like this. How much are you making a year? And probably the mid-1800s, it could have been $200 a year, equivalent to $200 a year. And you had to feed your family of 9 or 10, your whole substance was taken off that land. They had said, okay, we're going to pay you $400 a year, and you're going to come into our factory. Now, the unsuspecting individual didn't realize that the landlord also was going to own the residence that they were in, and most likely would charge $200 a year for his family to move off sprawling land with organic food and organic soil into little tiny stamp-size apartments in major urban settings, and charge half the money of the 400 for them to rent those places. And they were working 6 and 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Now, this was a major, major social shift. And for the first time in history, we started to estrange ourselves from what we had been used to for the entirety of time we'd been here. This was when a few over many became the trend. It was an era driven by intellect and innovation, laying the ground for success in America's burgeoning industrial landscape. So very soon after the English came up with the Industrial Revolution, the Americans hijacked it. So as pioneering industrial power, the United States harnessed manufacturing, oil exploration. We found we had oil here, and in Britain, they didn't really have it at that point. Now they mine it offshore, unfortunately. And intervention, underpinning by its fertile soil that no one on the planet could not be fed by the United States. So where we became a superpower is we were making products to sell the world, and we also were able to feed the world beyond our own people. This era was symbolic of American resilience and ingenuity. And that's where America became what we are currently today. And we continued on. Nobody was happy. We went into the information age. And I'll never forget, way back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was reading about what was about ready to happen. And it was sort of surprising to me, but boy, did it come true. The information age, marked by advancements in technology, communication, and networking, this period revolutionized how we interact and disseminate information, with mathematics playing a pivotal role in shaping our connection and understanding of the whole world. Now, that information age changed us. For the first time in history, we weren't eating what we grew, trading what we grew, paying for somebody who grew something. We were now buying products that were actually information. They weren't actual products. When we go in and we buy an apple, we know it's an apple. But now we're actually paying money for information. And I was stunned when I read about that, but my God, it is happening now. Now, we didn't stand still. What happened is, way back, not too long ago, in 2017, we had something called supercomputers that morphed into what we call artificial intelligence. And up until 2017, we were saying what we put in is what we get out. But something really odd happened. The computer started to have an opinion of its own. The programming programmed itself. And now this has become abundantly clear that we actually have computers that have opinions and can gather massive amounts of knowledge well beyond Einstein on steroids. And our world overnight is transforming now into the new age that I call the age of consciousness. Now, this can be a very frightening time if you're holding on to the past. This can be an extremely scary time for those of you that ask, how are we going to live in a world that doesn't resemble the world that we're now in? And that's what we're facing at this moment. When we literally have computers that are going to be smarter than any human being who has ever lived on the planet. Now, we can say that's frightening, but we can also say that's liberating. With the advent of artificial intelligence, the imperative for humans to elevate their values has never been more critical. In an age where control over awareness is elusive, self-realization becomes essential to attain higher consciousness. So let's break that down. What did I just say to you? So very few people, after we went through the Industrial Revolution and the information age, actually know what their value system is, who they are, why they're here, what life is about. So we've lost ourselves. 150, 200, 300 years ago, when people were very young, they realized that they were going to cultivate food for their family and community. There wasn't a whole lot of question. People weren't trying to find themselves at 50 years old. Now people have never found themselves because they don't have those core values as we speak about. Now, when you don't have core values, you don't have an ability to be aware because you are an empty vessel that can be filled with data, information, and propaganda. And this is exactly what's happening in our world today. If we go back to the year 1990, we had a handful of people daily trying to sell us something and change our mindset. As we are doing this presentation, we're up to 3,000 hits a day trying to change your mind or sell you something. And it's very subtle. As you know, when you're near your phone and speak about a particular subject, the next thing you know, your phone is having 10 different options on that subject. And this is why today, this is a liberating time, because we can go back to where we began. Remember, where we began is confidence, security, and abundance. Let's go through that again. Confidence, security, and abundance. Because we no longer have to be the smartest woman, the smartest man in the room. It's actually impossible at this point. So we have to be the person who actually develops self-realization. What is that? A realized self. Well, a realized self is a person who realizes why they're here and what life is about. If you don't know those things, life is a mundane, cyclical process of unhappiness. And I actually think we're moving into a very good time in history, but we have to fuel it with the things that we know work. Now, how a lot of this happened, the impact of industrial and corporate dominance. This is pretty clear. It was not long ago where people had say in developed countries. Now we recognize that for those so-called leaders in those countries to be in the positions of power, they have to be funded by industries and corporations. And the dominance has compromised our health, our environment, and prospects for a brighter future, because it's an entrapment. The degradation of our soil, air, and essential natural resources calls for an effort to reclaim our inherent rights to these vital assets. That's where we find ourselves today. Governments now represent these nefarious businesses, not humanity and our inherent rights. Now, with that said, why we have such illness today is because of what I said early on. We're confused, we're lost, we're valueless, we don't know why we're here. You are a moving target. Now, to complicate that issue, on top of it, your air is polluted, the water is polluted, the so-called food source is polluted. Last year alone in this country, the United States, these industries with fake food, as I call it, spent $9 billion targeting you to buy fake food that creates psychological and physiological disorders. $2 billion of that dollars were actually spent on targeting our children. Now, there are civil places in the world, that's one example, Sweden, another, the province of Quebec, that have banned targeting children with this calorie-less junk food that's making brain cancer and ADD, neurological problems for these youngsters, obesity for these youngsters. And what we know, sadly, is that we have a situation that is so horrible, so horrific, that we have got to stop it. So in Quebec, the province, as well as Sweden, when they took away the targeting of our youth, the health spiked, it went up. We've got to make this a mandate. We have got to force our governments to stop allowing this criminal activity to occur. It's not good enough we get together on the real truth about health and talk about these things and have a tribe of people who understand it. This tribe have got to be representative of what the whole human race needs today. And without it, we are going to be under control as we have been. And that we sure don't need any more of. When we start to look at the next problem, the toll of modern agriculture. Remember, everything was little farms, family farms. They are practically non-existent at this point. The widespread use of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, GMOs, and now CRISPR technologies have been scientifically linked to premature aging and disease. These alarming trends underscore the urgent need for a return to organic and natural practices. Now, this should not be something that we hope for. This is something we have to work hard for. We have to protect those people who may not be as awake as you are with this, your family and friends. You have to make them aware. Once we make this the norm, there's two things that are going to happen. The availability of healthy, nutritious foods are going to grow, and the prices are going to come down. But at this point, with major agricultural companies running most of the so-called farming, it seems like an uphill battle. The next slide is going to give you some hope. One of the great young people out there today doing the work is a guy called Dr. Zack Bush. And Zack Bush was one of the three doctors that did the foreword to my last book, The Self-Healing Diet. Is a guy who had such courage. He was practicing what I call lifestyle medicine and sitting with patients. And after a while recognized he was telling the patients to eat a particular way, to live a particular way, but these products and foods were not available. So he actually, in great part, left his role as a medical doctor and now is working with the farming community. And we can throw our hands up and say this is impossible, but he's proving it's very possible. So what he does is he goes to small chemical farms and says to the farmer, we're going to make sure that the money you've been making the last 2 or so years, you're going to continue to make. And in 2.5 years, we're going to convert your farm from a synthetic farm to an organic farm. By the 4th or 5th year, you're going to make more money. And this is not only here in the United States, it's globally. So this is something that we have to look closely at because Dr. Bush says it beautifully here. We have created the collapse of human cellular metabolism due to chemical farming practices. We are so sick today and aging prematurely today at a rate that we've never seen before. A recent study that came out of Harvard University even alarmed them. The fastest growing major cancer they ever saw is with the young population today. In the last several years, colorectal cancer has gone up 300%. In the past, they said, let's take more money and investigate why. They no longer say that. They say it's our diet, it's our lifestyle. It's time that scientists and that we, the public, say gently but strongly, we demand a change. And we demand the change for the future of our species. We cross-circuited clarity. So people were fairly clear before. I'm not saying it was perfect, but they know who they were, where they were going, why they were here. Our bodies and their intricate organ systems face relentless assaults that impair brain function and awareness, leaving individuals vulnerable to manipulation. These highlights the importance of strengthening our natural defenses. Now, what are your natural defenses? We always think that's some kind of a martial art. Well, it's not only biological, it's psychological and it's spiritual. You've got to have defenses that do not allow the nefarious, the negative to enter your mind. Because there are systems in place that have been here for many, many generations that have one objective: to alter that mind in the person who's an empty vessel. And we're going to actually now introduce you to a former KGB agent who was working with Putin in Russia and fled there 40 years ago. And this is part of what he said. But I want you to listen astutely and clearly to what they said they were going to do, and I can assure you are doing here in the West.
Brian, we can't hear the video.
So we can't hear.
Kevin, can you stop sharing and then share? Kevin, can you stop sharing your screen? Now share it again and do share with audio. Share sound, then click the presentation.
Eyes.
Great,
All American mass media has to do is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. The main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
So I want you to listen astutely to what he said. We'll repeat some of the high points. He said that the espionage is only 15%, but 85% is propaganda. And they spend all of their time molding and changing mindsets of people. As he pointed out, which you can see in real time now in this country and around the world, they've gotten people so off balance that they're capable of having you not know how to defend yourself, your family, your country. That they worked hard and have been successful in doing so. So now we're going to go to MIT and give you some data to back this. This is a study from just a handful of years ago in 2019. So the top Christian American pages on Facebook on October 2019. Now, from what MIT tells us is 80% of Christians who are on the internet, 80% of the highest population of Americans we have, Christian Americans, look at these 20 websites in a week, 80% of them. But 19 of them are actually run, controlled, and manipulated by the Russians. Now, I want you to just let that sink into your head for just a minute. So the core population, here we have in the United States, MIT, the top science institute on the planet Earth, back about 4 years ago, exposed that 19 of the most watched Facebook channels are actually manipulated by the very Russians, like the man was speaking about just a minute ago. So start to wonder whether or not your mindset is your mindset or has been set by somebody else. So now the role of artificial intelligence. AI challenges us to embrace our instincts and allow wisdom derived from quantum patterns to enhance our consciousness, marking a transition towards a life driven by instinctual knowledge and insight. Now let's talk about those two words. Instinctual knowledge is rare today. That when we started into the Industrial Revolution, the man with the most common sense who knew how to plow the field and develop the biggest crop was no longer that important. The woman who was the best midwife and mother in the village was considered not so important also. So we moved to the guy who was the smartest. And often not only were they smart, but they were devious. So now for a couple of 100 years, intelligence and intellect has been cherished and relished. This is why we have such a pervasive amount of young people that are discouraged from doing work with their hands and told that the best way to success is to be in a university and use their brain. So the result of this, after many generations, is we've lost our instinctual knowledge that those people had living on and off the land, that our ancestors, the nomads, had. It hardly exists anymore. And that's where you gain insight, personal insight, individual insight, not insight that has been derived from what has been told to you by others or the tribe you choose to be part of, but that voice that comes from your heart and your soul. We can get to that point by allowing the intellect to go back into the patterns it will be within computer programs. And now liberate ourselves to get back to be the humans we originally were, with great depth, great wisdom, and more important than that, embracing the wisdom. The era of wisdom heralds the obsolescence of limited thinking and fear-driven existence. Most of you listening today have a lot of fear. Just think about it for a moment. This is a time to embrace freedom and delve deeply into self-discovery, assuring all our faculties are utilized to their fullest potential. What you see, what you touch, what you feel, what you eat, who you're with, your environments. All of these things are so important as who we are and why we're here and our contribution. Embrace wisdom. And wisdom is not from the intellect. Wisdom is from the instinctual inner self. Create your freedom. True freedom is an inherent right and a personal obligation. I won't leave that until I repeat personal obligation. Don't think that you deserve freedom without working for it, or that you live in freedom without continuing to embrace it and to represent it. You've got to work for it. It involves breaking free from restrictions, societal patterns, boy, do we have a lot of those, and embracing a journey towards self-fulfillment and unified humanity. Now, every book that I've ever read from the spiritual realm tells us that we should unify humanity, not separate it, they and us, but more so as our oldest ancestors did, all of us. not they and us. When you do that, you build a global tribe of consciousness that does not allow what has now become modern society and modern culture. I call it the death and dying society, the death and dying culture. That we go from one day to the next, fumbling, not knowing where we're going, why we're going, and who we are. And this is a disgrace, because if we just abandon this fear-driven existence and go back to take our lives in our hands and develop and mold our lives into what we believe are the best at the highest level, you transform. And you go from a whiner at that point and a victim to a person that is a contributor to a greater humanity. One must often have to give the pain before they share the love. It's not easy, it's painful to do something like this. Because you have to say the word no. I will not participate in poisoning myself, others, the earth, my mind, my soul, my spirit, my body. I just will not participate in that. And until you're living at that level of awareness and consciousness, you're not living as a human should live, our birthright. So important for you to live this way. Inspirations of freedom. Innovators like Galileo, poor Galileo, they locked him up because he was actually describing reality. And they said, you can't describe reality. Those of us that are in power sold a particular reality. And you're saying, by the way, you have a new reality that's beyond and bigger and better, and you don't have to be controlled by me, the power broker? And Galileo said, no, you're part of the universe. Well, they didn't like that very much, but Galileo turned out to be right. The Wright brothers, Thoreau. You ever read Thoreau? Thoreau was so in tune with everything in his environment and understood the significance of the gift of life and shared that with beautiful and heart-warming words. Just read it. And people like Musk, we may like or dislike what he does most of the time, but he's off the rails. People said, oh no, electric cars will never be good. Nobody's going to want electric cars. And what happened is, you don't know this, but Elon Musk designed a very, very sexy and fast electric car that people wanted. And within a short time after he did that, and it was a success, the fastest growing automobile company in the history of automobile companies, he took the blueprints and sent them to every other company in the world for free and said, here's how to make an electric car. Because he wasn't in the business to make electric cars, he was in the business of changing the world. When he found out that America was going to China and to Russia to send payloads, as we call them, up into space, because we no longer made good and effective rockets in the United States, he said, well, I'm going to do that for 10% of the price. That means for 10 times less or 9 times less, I'm going to create rockets. And everyone laughed and said, oh, no, you're not going to do it. And he did it. And how he did it, he said, you know, you're blowing up billion-dollar rockets every time. I'm going to make a rocket come back and we can reuse the rocket. And so we've got to think in the ways some of these inventive people do. In your own life, maybe you're not going to create rockets or electric cars or airplanes or be Galileo, but you can be a person in your own life that creates reality that you want to live. You want to live in that reality. You want to flourish in that reality. You want to thrive in that reality. Tools for emancipation. Embrace your true self with commitment and passion. That says a lot. You got to commit. Not, oh, that's a good idea. Let me do it on weekends. No, this is a commitment. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you've got to do it passionately. You've got to be unwavering in your commitment to excellence. Move beyond the familiar. challenge boundaries, nourish your mind and body, and stand firm in your truths. You don't have to be obstructive. You don't have to be mean. Just you have to exemplify truth. This is the essence of living free and fully. Freedom is real.